welcome everyone. As we have been going throughout the day, we have been doing our best to record everything. And this is our closing speaker for day one, but technically our opening keynote. So I'll hand it over after doing a brief bio. Again, you all are probably tired of hearing from me. I'm Stephanie, one of the organizers of the Including Disability Global Summit. And I am introducing the wonderful Dr. Jennifer Rode, who is an associate professor at the University College of London. Her research is focused on critical computing, where she uses ethnographic methods to understand marginalized populations and creates both theory and tools to improve their quality of life. She focuses on technologies such as telepresence, e-textiles, and generative AI. Dr. Rode received her PhD from the University of California, Irvine, advised by Paul Durish and Genevieve Bell, and she holds a Master of Human-Computer Interaction as well as a BS in Anthropology from Carnegie Mellon University. Jennifer has over 10.
Shouldn't laugh at my own bio.
Sorry?
I said I shouldn't be laughing at my own bio, but please go ahead.
It's all the amazing things you do. Sometimes it's weird when it's all put together, right? Well, we're so grateful to have you. And that's not all. Her formal studies as a usability engineer, ethnographer, consultant. You've worked on product design and evaluation at TiVo, Cinmatech, IBM, Intel, among many others. As someone in community, Jennifer has identified as disabled since high school and was awarded a Best Paper Award at UBComp and multiple see, this is not my area, I apologize, Best Paper nominees. And Rode is a distinguished member of the Association of Computer Machinery, ACM, via the scientist route, and an ACM distinguished scholar, excuse me. There's so much. And a shameless plug, Dr. Rode also recently published in the Including Disability Journal an incredible paper entitled Constructing Accessible Technology Policy in a University Setting During COVID. So yeah, with all of that, I think I've said enough, but now Dr. Rode will share an incredible talk, and we're so excited to have you here today.
Fantastic. Okay, so you can see my slides. I just want to check on that.
We can. They look great.
Okay, fantastic. I should have edited down that bio. You apparently ended up with a very long version. I'm sorry about that, everyone. Hi, I'm Jennifer Rode. My talk is Adapt and Resist, Spoons, Unicorns, and Rainbows. We'll not spend so much time on spoons, unicorns, and rainbows because the world has gotten very seriously lately, and we're going to talk about some of the more serious issues. Okay, so I would like to ask you, I would like you to know that I am JR6G on Bluesky and Twitter, and I will be answering any questions that are posted there after the talk, in addition to questions that are live. Now, I want to take a moment to, first off, rearrange the Zoom window so I can't see the captioner. Okay, captioner, I am too ADD to see you sign. Okay, I am putting something in front of you, captioner. I'm very sorry. Okay, now I can concentrate. Moving on. Okay, so ladies, gentle-queers, and gentlemen, I'm happy to be with you here today. Let's talk a little bit about the accessibility of the talk. There are two versions of the slides, which Stephanie has shared. There's this black and white version, which is best for my visual disability, but I know that's not great for a lot of you dyslexics. So there's also a black text on a light blue version that might support some of your access needs. My talk will also often include screenshots and links to newspaper articles. I've always included links to allow you to read later. The included screenshots are really there as evidence to support what I'm saying. You don't need to read it. You can concentrate on what I'm saying, but I wanted you to see that there is an actual newspaper article, that I'm not dreaming this stuff up. I've also included extensive alt text for all of the images. Now, anyone who has blindness or visual impairment, please know I tried my very best to explain some of these photos, but some of them are extremely emotionally charged, and it was very difficult to do so, and I hope you understand that I did my best. Okay, so let's move on to the actual talk. So let's talk about the Lorax. The Lorax is a children's story by Dr. Seuss where scarves are made from fluffy tops of cotton-like trees. So they're cutting the trees down to make these scarves. And the story is talking about how the slow systematic exploitation of resources in the name of business um, is problematic. And eventually all the trees are cut down and the world is left a barren wasteland. But there's hope. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. That's what Dr. Seuss says. Eventually, as the story ends, the last known seed is planted, and because someone cared an awful lot, the natural world is restored. So let us together find that seed and replant it and bring back the resources we need to ensure the environment supports the need of disabled people. It's been a long few months. This slide shows a political cartoon with a line of people in front of the US Capitol asking for help as they lost their various jobs. And they're holding up signs, and one lost their job protecting Americans from terrorism, educating our children, providing aid to America's neediest, protecting our national parks, and predicting national weather. When I agreed to give the keynote for a talk with the title Adapt and Resist, it was a few months ago, and the outlook for the disabled community was not as bleak. Even in the last few days, the situation has worsened appreciably. Thus, I've left with a mammoth task. In 45 minutes, I'm not going to be able to solve all of these problems, but I hope to inspire you and leave you with a bit of hope. Much of this talk is centered on the American political crisis at the moment as it relates to disability. Now, I recognize based on the participation numbers from last year that about a quarter of you are from overseas. And speaking as an American working overseas, I know it drives my European colleagues crazy when Americans center the dialogue on their own perspective. So I apologize for doing so. We really are going through a lot right now. And unfortunately, these problems are bleeding across borders. So I hope this talk provides you with understanding as it occurs. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to try to address the following topics. How is the current political climate in the US impacting the lived experience of disabled people and disability research? What forms of resistance are we seeing? What can we learn from history? And what can we do to adapt and resist? My goal in this talk, as I said, is to provide you with hope and resistance strategies drawn from other social justice causes so that people with disabilities can continue to organize resistance. So who am I? Because hopefully my positionality will allow you to understand my perspective. I'm a disabled person. I have lupus, cancer, migraines, ADHD, dyslexia, PTSD, and depression. Fun. And that's a picture of my service cat helping me drive a telepresence robot. Next, I am queer, Jewish, and non-binary. And I'm a US citizen, but I'm also an associate professor at UCL. That means I have the luxury and the privilege of a safe job overseas that affords me intellectual freedom. But I also consider myself to be in exile due to my disability, having lost my tenure-track job in America because of my disability. That said, I managed to rebound and I have a good job at UCL, so that is possible. I'm an anthropologist studying human-computer interaction. I focus on using critical theory to understand the values of sexism, ableism, racism, trans, and queer phobia that get designed into technologies due to the accidental, or perhaps not accidental, unfortunately, implicit biases of their designer. I'm a researcher, and a key thread of my recent work is looking at the benefits and drawbacks of telepresence as a way of providing mediated communication by people with disabilities so that they have a physical body and perhaps might want to stay at home and still participate in the outside world. Finally, I'm a disability activist. I'm co-founder of Access SIG Chi, an organization that strives to make academic life accessible to people with disabilities. So now you know a little bit about me. Access SIG Chi is most infamous for its sit-in at Chi 2019, which is the computer science conference in my field that focuses on human-computer interaction, making computers easier to use, and it covers all of accessibility. Doing so resulted in marked changes to the organization of academic life and computing to make it more accessible, both through conferences themselves being more physically accessible and publications being more digitally accessible. We have a long way to go, but by protesting from the inside, we made a first step of ensuring people with disabilities can participate fully in its dialogue, because if we can't participate in the scientific discourse that's making our technology accessible, it's really problematic, and we've made a little progress there. So where are we now? Well, it feels like America is being thrown off a metaphorical cliff. A lot has happened to disabled people in the last few months. Next, I'm going to catalog what has happened recently. I'd like to give a trigger warning for those of you with depression. The next few slides will be difficult, and feel free to rejoin us in about 2.5 minutes. The current presidential administration has banned a lot of words associated with DEI from receiving government funding or even being used on government websites, and this includes the words accessibility, disability, and disabilities. A lot of words regarding other types of DEI efforts have been banned, and this is a very sad list put together by the New York Times: advocacy, diversity, LGBTQ, Latinx, sex. Finally, climate change words were also flagged, and climate change will disproportionately impact people at the margins of society, such as disabled people. Scientific research was terminated, the funding of it was terminated from organizations like the National Institute of Health, Center for Disease Control, the National Science Foundation. The money was either frozen or in increasing instances lately cut altogether. And this is affecting real people's lives. I have a postdoc whose job offer is in limbo. I have a colleague whose faculty job that they were offered and they had a contract signed was yanked from them. So this is really hurting people. Data associated with these terms has been disappeared from government websites, including medical data about our disabilities. And there's concern about the access of scientific databases of research publications. There are early reports of data from a company called Qualtrics on trans people being removed from cloud-based data sets. And this stems from the recent White House declaration, which I find abhorrent as a non-binary person, that there are only two genders. And this incident suggests that there is possibility that private companies may be pressured into following the American government's anti-DEIA policies, and that scientific data sets may be impacted, including scientific data sets for those of you that are overseas. So please, this is a reminder, back up all of your scientific data outside of the United States. We've lost access to our federally funded support workers. We've seen programs like Charting My Path for Future Successes being cut, and this was an important program that helps teens with disabilities transition into adult lives so that they could live independently. A recent presidential commission was formed, establishing the president's Make America Healthy Again Commission. While on the surface it sounds kind of promising, in reality, it aims to, quote, assess the prevalence of and threat posed by the prescriptions of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, stimulants, and weight loss drugs. There is tremendous concern amongst people with disabilities, especially those of us that are neurodivergent, and have mental health conditions, that this will result in limiting access to medications or result in further marginalization of people with these disabilities. Certainly, given the recent announcement that was very anti-autism by the Secretary of Health, the latter is increasingly looking to be true. So at this point, I'd like to take the opportunity, if the technology works, to make this a little interactive. I've put up a QR code and a question and a URL. So the question I'm going to ask you is, which recent policy changes regarding people with disabilities concern you the most? And if you'd like to participate, you can either, if you can see, scan the QR code with your phone and click on the link and go to the website, and it will give you 3 boxes in which you can type 3 policy changes that concern you. Or you can go to menti.com and type this number, and I'm going to say it twice, 37635. Oh, I'm dyslexic. Let's try that again. 37636528. That number again is 37636528. Okay, let's swap over to Menti and see if we're getting some answers from you guys. Okay, so go to menti.com and the code is still on the screen. And so far, we don't have any replies. Menti.com, code 37636528. Is anyone attempting to do this and it's not working? Let's hit refresh. Maybe it's just taking a while.
I'm hearing from folks in the chat that it's a different prompt that they're getting.
What is the prompt that they're getting?
Could
We get a
folks type
question
in?
asking us, what action will you take to affect change for people with disabilities?
Okay, answer that question then.
That's a good one too.
I see. It's the second question that they're getting. I'm not sure why. We'll be answering that question at the end. Okay. So let's move on. We'll get to that other question at the end. This is what happens when you try to do fancy things with technology. You're let
You
go
are
wrong.
welcome to put those answers in the chat though too, if there's
Put those
policy.
answers in the chat. Is it possible for me to see the chat? Put them in, people can put them in the chat and we will read
we'll
them
get-
that way.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go over to the chat and I will read them. Okay, so what action will people take? Yeah, different question. Okay, people are not putting it in the chat yet. Anyone wants to put it in the chat, I will. So don't answer the question about change. So we have cutting funding on refugee programs, patient advocacy, removal of content from data sets and websites, potential cuts on Medicaid. See, the reason we're doing this interactively was there are more bad things that have happened than I could possibly fit on one slide set. So let's go through a few more of these. Threats to LGBTQ people, loss of telehealth, absolutely. I tried to center on disabled people, but as someone with a lot of sectional identities, the threats to LGBT people is very problematic to me. Okay, let's give it one more minute. Getting put a target list for camps, wellness farms. Absolutely. And, because I was giving a keynote, I didn't want to say wellness farms, so I used a polite euphemism. But when I was talking about the Presidential Commission, I was absolutely expressing concern that there would be lists of people who are put in wellness farms, getting put on a target list for being autistic, trying to make the 504 unconstitutional. Absolutely. If that happens, that's going to be very problematic for all of us. Okay, before we get too depressed, I'm going to switch back to the actual talk, the less interactive part of the talk, and let's talk about some things that maybe can help a bit. So what resistance are we seeing now? I like this meme as it reads, first they came for the scientist, and then the National Park Service said, lol, laugh out loud, no, and went rogue. And we were all like, I wasn't expecting the park rangers to lead the resistance. None of the dystopian novels I read prepared me for this, but cool. We are seeing resistance. We are seeing protests. millions of people coming out. We are seeing symbolic statements. This slide shows a flag that's been hung upside down on the El Capitan monolith in Yosemite. Upside down flags in American naval lore are signs of gravest distress. This flag is hung up a cliff face, inaccessible to all but rock climbers, making it effectively permanent. Sorry, I had to minimize the chat too. We are seeing organizations like the NSA Archives trying to record some of those missing data sets that the administration is hiding. And thankfully, they're making a lot of progress, even though it's going slowly. And again, there will be links to some of these newspaper articles and resources in the slide deck. We're seeing symbols being reappropriated. While to the disabled community, spoons are a unit of energy, to the public at large, there's something from which they eat their cereal. That's where we were at when I gave this talk its title, and yet now, amongst US government employees, they're being reappropriated as symbols of resistance. Elon Musk's initial memo from Dodge foreshadowing the reduction in staff to come was called a fork in the road. And in this instance, the fork has literally been blocked by the spoon. Spoons became such a symbol of resistance that the US government has blocked the spoon emoji on many of its platforms. The spoon is now a symbol of resistance that's too powerful to put in the hands of the workers. We're seeing smaller responses. This is one that I'm fortunate enough to be involved in that focuses on computer science and is sponsored by groups like My Access SIG Chi, SIG Access, which is the accessibility special interest group within the computer science world, and then the HCI one, SIG Chi. And it's basically a matching service that allows for scholars that are struggling to present their research because of challenges surrounding disability, parenting, visas, or so forth, have a chance to present their academic work, because most conferences, unlike this fantastic conferences, are online only. And if you don't have the money to travel, often internationally, Kai this year is in Japan, you don't get to present, and it's disproportionately hurting certain kinds of scholars and hurting their careers in terms of networking and visibility. So this matching service solves the problem by hooking people that have venues to give talks with potentially marginalized speakers. So we're asking for people with existing seminar series on accessibility or human-computer interaction to volunteer a slot for an unheard presentation. And then we're soliciting impacted speakers in these research areas and giving them a chance to sign up. And if you are in this area, there's a link on this slide. It's off of the Access SIG Chi website. SIG Chi is SIGCHI, accesssigchi.com. And you can sign up here. And while this is a computer science focused initiative, there's lots of space to replicate this program for other areas of academia to support disabled scholars. Any field from chemistry to disability studies, from art history to Slavic languages could do so. And we've also arrived at the point of other forms of organized resistance. Somehow, against most odds, the responsibility for leadership seems to not fall with our elected political leaders, but a group of rebel park rangers known as the Alternative National Park Service. And they have accounts on Facebook and Bluesky, and their Facebook account here has some 4.1 million followers. They post a lot of interesting information about what's going on, and a lot about disability, and particularly recently about the Secretary of Health statements on autism. But the Facebook post on this slide ominously reads 17/2/28/36/11. And this is one of many posts that they've made with random numbers, calling their members of their coalition to action for an unknown purpose, but that's perceived to be good. And they call on their followers, the ones that aren't in the coalition, the ones without government jobs like me, to make random comments on the post to keep the Facebook algorithm happy and keep the post visible. This request is justified only as 80 staffers have been subjected to lie detector tests. This is all we can share at this time. In response to that, 95,700 posts were made in response to the request, including mine with a line from Hamilton, "Tomorrow there'll be more of us." Something is growing, resistance is happening, even if it's in an incomprehensible form, and there is hope. This begs the question then, with all these terrible things happening, curtailing the rights and lives of disabled and other minoritized people, what can we do? I propose we learn from history. The next few slides also get a trigger warning, the next slide in particular, as I'm going to discuss some of the darkest chapters of American prejudice. During McCarthyism, President Harry S. Truman wrote Executive Order 9835 on the 21st of March, 1947, and this required that all federal civil service employees would be screened for loyalty. The goal was to identify membership or affiliation with any organization determined by the Attorney General to be totalitarian, fascist, communist, or subversive. But in reality, it led to the targeting of minoritized groups such as homosexuals, as well as academics, left-wing politicians, and labor union activists. People a lot like many of us. During World War II, due to President Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066, the United States forcibly relocated and incarcerated 120,000 people, putting them in Japanese internment camps. And it's important to note that 2/3 of these people were American citizens, so even American citizenship was not a protection. More recently, the current president, during his last term, again created internment camps for immigrants, and he's doing again so now. He's even threatening to send citizens once again overseas, people that don't comply with his loyalty tests. We see a historical repetition here of the United States government persecuting marginalized groups. And sadly, there's no reason it can't happen again. And the next time it may be disabled people. So what has worked? Not all protests succeed. The Hong Kong pro-democracy protests saw creative use of thousands of brightly colored umbrellas to protect their wielders from facial recognition software, allowing them to protest the Chinese government's suppression of democracy in Hong Kong. Despite the scale of the protests, The Guardian, a British newspaper, 10 years later, questions its effectiveness. Little has changed to support democracy in China. The open question then is, what can we do better? Well, if 504 doesn't get repealed, we still have it on the books. So what is 504? It's the section of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it's still on the books for the moment. And it states that no, quote, otherwise qualified individual with a disability in the US, as defined in section 705 of this title, shall solely by reason of his or her disability be excluded for participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Despite the present constitutional crisis, it's beneficial to continue to document the ways the present administration is violating the rules of law, and history will catch up with the present moment. It did with McCarthyism, it will now. Sit-ins work. They allow for the peaceful obstruction of daily life. Sit-ins at lunch counters during the civil rights movement worked. The 504 protests worked because people peacefully obstructed the majority's life. In doing so, they forced the majority to realize minorities were people just like them. Jim Ego of the AIDS movement once said, "We found out At least in those first few years, if you could identify an obvious problem, if you could get the media on board about it, and if you could get 200 to 300 ACT UP people, that was his organization, sitting in at a very particular target and making it very, very uncomfortable for the powers that were, you could affect very, very quick change. The stand-up sit-in photographed on the right of this slide was at the height of the AIDS crisis. It filled Grand Central Station with queer protesters, shutting down the station to commuters. Bunches of helium-filled pink balloons came together from the corners of the room until suddenly they were used to lift a banner alight, and dramatically the message, "Money for AIDS, not for war," arose, leaving the crowd onlookers spellbound. We, as disabled people, need to harness the power of messaging as we use our disabled bodies to make it clear that we too are part of society. In the present day, though, it's imperative that protests remain peaceful, as there's genuine concern that the establishments are looking for opportunities to physically oppress protesters such that they become scapegoats. Yet peaceful sit-ins remain powerful tools. We need to form coalitions. Historically, these have worked. In the American Civil Rights Movement, Jewish people provided important support. In the UK, what was then known as lesbians and gays provided vital support for the Welsh miners' strike in the 1980s under Thatcher. In doing so, it exposed working class Welsh folks from small communities to gay culture that had been centered in London. And in doing so, it hastened queer acceptance in the UK, and it helped the miners. And eventually, they got their jobs back. So it was a win-win by having a very unexpected coalition. Back in the United States, again, the AIDS movement, we saw gay rights organizations stand up, and WHAM, the Women's Health Action Mobilization, joined together. At the time, the medical definition of AIDS was defined in such a way that it didn't include the symptoms and associated conditions more experienced by women with AIDS. The definition of AIDS was centered on men. By not classifying women's symptoms as AIDS, it meant women could not qualify for disability benefits when they were unable to work. This movement clarified that AIDS was a woman's disease too, and that the AIDS movement in general raised awareness not just of AIDS, but that there was a system of multiple inequities that affected women, people of color, the poor, IV drug users, that was rooted in the healthcare system and magnified by policy. The disabled community must too find its allies, seniors, many of whom become disabled, even if they do not consider themselves to be, are one such natural choice. And we could do what the civil rights movement did with the Jewish individuals who were slightly more accepted in mainstream society at the time, and use their voices to help us get our messages across. History tells us we must find common cause to be most effective. We can reappropriate symbols. The Nazis used the pink triangle as an identifying mark for homosexual prisoners in concentration camps. Decades later, the gay rights movement in the 1980s reappropriated them as part of their campaign against AIDS. Pink triangles in the AIDS movement were reappropriated and worn with pride. Just as the Crip Pride movement within the disability community is taking back those terms and removing their stigma, we need to harness and subvert the power of ableist tropes and icons. Homophobia and transphobia historically resulted in individuals who were queer, individuals believing that those of us that were queer were living lives that were fundamentally incompatible with religious expression. Members of organizations such as the UK-based lesbian and gay Christian movement and the One Body, One Faith movement in the United States, amongst others, challenged this perception. By continuing to engage as queer people in faith organizations, living and participating in all aspects of religious life, rather than pulling back, they were able to effect slow change. One Body, One Faith is still pushing back on conversion theory and recent anti-trans legislation, even in the last few weeks in response to the British government's declaring that I'm no longer allowed to use the ladies' toilet. While this work's not done, it does show how infiltrating the other and encouraging a meaningful dialogue slowly changes perception. Maybe not over 15 years, but maybe over 50. This is well illustrated by water eroding rock. It starts with a single drip, but over time, a measurable impact has occurred. If things continue as they have been with the present administration's fight against DEI, a logical progression would be to push it back against the teaching of disability studies. In Poland, at 2 points during the occupation, about 100 years apart, teaching of certain ideas became problematic, and the education of women was entirely prohibited. So what they call flying universities were formed. Scholars such as Marie Sklodowska Curie, Madame Curie, as she later became known in France, were educated in them. So these were very high quality organizations that produced influential world-class scholars, one of whom even won a Nobel Prize. These were ad hoc universities that scheduled lectures at irregular locations at inconsistent hours to ensure they remained clandestine. They were unaccredited, but it didn't matter because it was the knowledge and not the degree that mattered. This effort went on for decades, and many great Polish intellectuals' origins can become attributed to them. We must continue to teach disability studies, and we must continue research by disabled people on topics that matter to us. The internet and encryption services like Tor will make flying cyber universities easier. Similarly, as academic scholars lose research funding to academic conferences where ideas are under threat, where the exchange of ideas are under threat, we need online international conferences free from governmental shackles to allow for the continued exchange of ideas, especially regarding topics such as disability. And I'm hoping to have more announcements there, so follow me on Twitter. JR6G. We need to harness the rage and emphasize harm. ACT UP, which was the AIDS organization, in their Ashes action in 1997, did one of the most striking protests I've ever heard of. They called on their protesters to take the cremated human remains, the ashes, of their own loved ones who died from AIDS, or in their words, those that were, quote, murdered by AIDS and killed by government neglect, unquote, and throw those ashes onto the White House lawn. In preparation for this talk, I watched videos of that action. It was harrowing as dozens of largely young people sprinkled the ashes of their loved ones on the White House lawn, often tearfully, and they did so while saying their final goodbyes. The AIDS movement managed to take the American Capitol and make it the graveyard of the AIDS movement. This private moment was captured as a media spectacle and shared the rawness and youth of AIDS deaths. And importantly, it humanized them. Queers were people just like some of the viewers of the TV and some of the queers viewing the TV. They had loved ones too. It reminded Americans that queers were human and as such deserved health care for what was a treatable illness. We can't cure AIDS, we can treat it. As we fight back against the oppressions of our day, we need to remind the establishment that disabled people are people first and worthy of the same considerations. One thing we can do is try to incorporate designing for people with disabilities into an appeal for common humanity. And this might allow us to get traction in the current government funding climate. Everyone has a disabled relative or friend. We are as many as 1 in 5. We can appropriate movements such as the inclusive design movement. The inclusive design movement in technology and architecture advocates that instead of designing special purpose tools and spaces just for people with disabilities, we should be designing for everyone. A typical example is pictured here in a building courtyard. The photo shows a beautiful wheelchair ramp interlaced into a seating area with staircases on either side between two buildings. The space is covered in a canopy of trees. Warm wood tones make up the benches and the ramps, making the space inviting. So we can mask designing for disabled people under a rhetoric of inclusive design. Scandinavian feminists did this in computer science for decades. In their own languages, they wrote of participatory design and the need for gender diversity. Yet, when publishing in English, they always left out mentions of gender because it was too controversial for English-speaking computer scientists. Remember, the participatory design movement goes back as far as the late 70s, and we just weren't there yet in America. Amongst themselves, Scandinavian computer scientists always knew when they said inclusive design or participatory design that they meant gender equity, but it went under the radars. So when we say inclusive design, we know what we mean. Careful use of rhetoric can let us continue to seek funds for research and social programs for all, and we can ensure people with disabilities are foregrounded in part of broader efforts. Now, that comes with a little bit of caution. We have to be careful while doing that. Czesław Miłosz, in his book, The Captive Mind, writes about how intellectuals in Stalinist post-war Poland were forced to conceal beliefs. He uses the term Ketman. Ketman is borrowed from Islamic theology, where Muslims, amidst religious persecution, concealed their true beliefs to preserve their faith. Ketman is living with this contradiction. Miłosz reappropriates this in the Polish political context. You can hide your true values from your oppressors, but he argues that in doing so, you not only lie to others, but to yourself, compromising your own integrity. There's a cost that comes with allowing the perception of compliance, and that is the degradation of one's own soul. Applying this to the current situation, we could comply with the US president's executive orders. Academic institutions could swear allegiance to the administration's priorities and try to do stuff under the radar. One could tell oneself that their values are unchanged and quietly resist, but Ketnam is a reminder that doing so will still come at a cost. So as I bring this talk to a close, I want to encourage all of you to keep looking at the history of the social justice movement across the Black civil rights movement, across the queer movement, across all of the various movements for examples of successful protest strategies and reappropriate them for the digital age. And remember intersectionality. Disabled people have intersectional needs with many racial, class, gender, queer, and other minoritized categories. Remember, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. I want to close with an old Jewish story that was more recently retold by Rabbi Telushkin in his book of Jewish Values. An older man had spent a lifetime speaking ill of a rabbi, and towards the twilight of his life, he came to the rabbi seeking atonement for his malicious gossip. And the rabbi said that he would grant atonement, he would grant forgiveness if the man were to go home and tear open a pillow. So the man went home and he rent open a pillow and feathers spilled out. And he proudly returned to the rabbi to tell him that the task was complete and receive his forgiveness. Yet the rabbi then gave him an additional task to collect all the feathers. And the man protested that the feathers had been caught by the wind and were impossible to collect. The rabbi explained, the feathers were impossible to collect. So too was it impossible to undo the impact of gossip. Traditionally, this parable is used as a caution against gossip. Rabbi Telushkin is, of course, right that much gossip is harmful. But this human desire to repeat news can also be harnessed for good. Let us be the feathers that lilt and adapt to the wind, going ever higher. Let your messages of hope and resilience sail on the wind and spread your desires for disability justice far and wide. So, in the context of the disability rights movement, the feathers can be two things. One, they can be the malicious gossip that hurts us, speaking untruths about people with disabilities. We know that people with autism have value to society. And we have to acknowledge that once gossip gets out there, it's hard to collect those feathers. But at the same time, once our messages, our feathers of hope and resistance catch the wind, they too will be spread far and wide. So let's try to think about the positive side of that story. Now, we're going to go back to Mentimeter. And this time, we know that my second slide will show up. Go to menti.com, same code as before. It should work this time because you all were seeing this slide. And let's try to answer this question. What action will you take to affect change for people with disabilities? Because as we bring this talk to a close, I want to think going forward how each of us can make the world a bit better for people with disabilities. Oh, good. And now it's so we're going over to Safari. Okay, and I'm not seeing your word clouds, so let's do our backup approach of putting these things in chat. So if you could go to the Zoom chat, that would be lovely. And if you could put in your strategies for resistance. Okay, it's good to know that the word cloud is showing up for the participants, but not me. Intersectional activism, excellent. Someone posted, I am a disabled person who's also accessibility trained and embedded in web design for a large university. They can't take that knowledge out of their head. And that's exactly right. So Dina is engaging in inclusive design by being embedded in their organization. Stephanie, if you can see the word cloud, could you share your screen, please?
I couldn't see it either.
Okay, so let's have some more people put things in chat then so we can talk about it. So I'll tell you what I'm doing to try to resist things in the closing moments. I am working with my colleagues in computer science, and we are trying to start conferences that are online. I am also working with a organization that is trying to find PhD students that are at risk in America, possibly because they attended pro-Palestinian protests, possibly because they simply have a parking ticket or a speeding violation and they're at risk of being deported. And we're trying to match them up with PhD advisors overseas so they can continue their academic studies. And if anyone knows of a student studying disability and technology in this situation, you're welcome to send them to me. So if you have any questions, you can ask me now, or you can email me at jen@acm.org, or we can use Twitter or Bluesky. You can tweet me or Bluesky me at JR6G. And with that, Stephanie, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I'm very sorry that Mentimeter wasn't working. I really don't know what was up with that today.
Sometimes technology is just not cooperative. And again, it's great to have you, even though you're so far in the future. It's from us. So this is
Yes,
fantastic.
it's Wednesday here.
Happy Wednesday. So we do have one question that someone put in the Q&A that I'll read out now.
Okay.
How has anyone gotten over the support for other intersections, but not for disabled folks hurdle? Because I'm intersectional, but I'm also really angry at one of my intersections right now.
Okay, so that's a big question. And I do think some of these marginalized movements often really forget about those of us with disabilities. And I think there needs to be a lot of deep breathing and counting to 10 and having grace and educating, because what I have found throughout my life is that people without disabilities do not understand, and it sometimes takes years to educate people. I remember going to a museum with my own parents, people that love me a great deal, soon after I got diagnosed with lupus. And we walked into the door, and I wanted to sit down and have a cup of coffee and rest. And my father got so angry that I wasn't, he's like, we came all the way to the museum. We didn't intend, we're not here for coffee. Why aren't we, why aren't we seeing the Science Museum? And I'm like, Dad, I have lupus. I need to rest. And it took him about 10 years, but eventually I brought him around. And now he understands that we might get to a museum and we might need to sit down for 10 minutes because I might be out of spoons that day. So I would say that, it is a slow process. I have been chipping away at my own university where I have, many individuals who are in various solidarity organizations with me that have very little understanding of disability, and slow progress is being made. And just assume that it's going to happen over the course of years or decades, and not right away. Certainly, 20 years ago in computer science, conferences did not have accessibility chairs. We did not have captioners. We did not have CART. We had none of this. And, now it is expected in my part of computer science that we have an accessibility chair, that we have an accessibility budget, that we have a nice captioner like Dia Aaron, who's going to be here and sign language interpret for us, and CART and all of that. So it's a slow process. I hope that answered that question a bit. Stephanie, do we have another one?
So we don't have any in the chat, but our organizing committee made a whole bunch because we take that
Oh, of
kind of
course you did.
privilege.
Thank
So
you.
I will use one of theirs, of course, because we were so excited to have you here. So you've already shared sort of where you are on Twitter and Bluesky, and we've been talking all through it today about, where we can find resource and spaces. But what digital spaces for you have you been finding community in? If you have any other suggestions other than, we kind of joke the other place being Twitter, and we're also on Bluesky, so we've been tagging you in things as we've been online. But what else can you share?
So I think that there is a lot of disability activism going on in various private Slack groups. I really struggle with Slack because the contrast is too low, and the screen layout is such that it's really hard for people with disabilities. One of my dear friends, Katie Seaborn, is in the process of writing a custom extension for Slack to try to address my access needs, which is very, very kind of them. And if that starts working, I will share the extension as long as they allow me to. Um, I I really think Bluesky is fantastic, and I'm still using Facebook. I'm still finding, Facebook might be unmoderated now, but the communities themselves are still moderated. And so I'm finding, I am on an American Women in Britain community, which talks about a lot of intersectional issues. There are communities on Discord too, Owen, you're absolutely right. Um, I'm too low vision for Discord as well. And Substack, I don't have opinions on Substack. I've sort of given up on a lot of these because I'm too low vision to use them, and I'm sticking with some of the more accessible tools. Wendy Smith shared their action, by the way. They wanted to remind themselves that not all disabilities are visible and try to give everyone the space that they need. And I think that's beautiful, Wendy. Thank you so much. And Hannah has shared supporting accessible art exhibitions. Dr. Fink has shared awareness. Thank you for your work and the talk. Oh, thank you. I shouldn't have read that part. But Dr. Fink is going to engage with awareness. Jaden is going to find faith and hope in disability justice spaces, self-advocacy as a disabled individual. So these are all great answers. For those of you that are mobile, masks are solidarity. Okay, fantastic. Yes, 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 yes. Um, okay, other questions, Stephanie?
So you mentioned patience and education and holding space for people who are trying and not quite there. Are there any other strategies you recommend to build community across difference without getting, as we've been using, like swirled up in the tornado of chaos and terms and things like that, especially?
I think trying to give people space and looking for commonalities, assuming people mean well. When I first got to Britain, I would say people with disabilities a lot. And I would get yelled at a lot. And people would just assume, because I looked okay, that I was being an ableist schmuck and, that I didn't respect people with disabilities. Because, of course, in Britain, they don't use person first language. They say disabled people. And they're very, very offended when you say people with disabilities because it's the disability that's the most important, not the fact that you're a person. It's absolutely 100% opposite. And so people would jump down my throat about it. And, it really taught me that we need to not jump on each other for little mis little for misspeaking. Assume that somebody has a good heart until proven otherwise, and give them the opportunity to try their best to engage with you, even though their language might be imperfect, because I think we're so caught up on terminology, and I know it's hard. I use she, they pronouns, and I really grates at me when I hear people misgender my colleagues, and I correct them. But I realize also that for some of my older colleagues, that perhaps they're not doing it intentionally, or they're actually doing it to protect the individual that they're talking to. I've talked to a lot of older women who are terrified about sharing their pronouns, not because they dislike trans people, but because, they might be 70 or 80 now, or, our most senior colleagues in academia. And, when they came up, being a woman in the workforce was unusual. And so they did everything they could to downplay their femininity. And now sharing their pronouns, even though they know it's a sign of solidarity, they're worried that it will make them look too feminine. And yeah, there are times where we don't want to give them grace. When they're trying to deny us grants, and they're not giving accommodations, it's hard to give them grace. But if you don't try, we're not going to make any progress. And I spend a lot of time biting my tongue, and a lot of time in therapy, and a lot of time very depressed. And these are all real things. So I think it's very, very important to also talk about engaging in self-care and, working to support our own mental health so that we can get through this.
Absolutely. To recharge and be in spaces where you might need to scream and shout, take a breath, and then be able to go back out into the world. I wanted to let folks know that yes, the slides will be accessible through our website and everything like that, as well as Dr. Rhodes' amazing, recording will be available once we get everything figured out. But I want to make sure that we close out while we have our access needs still met with our interpreters and our CART. So I want to thank everyone, especially you, Dr. Rhodes. I'm going to do the round of applause here. And we're so grateful you were able to join us, even though you're all the way in tomorrow.
Oh, nobody has to call me Dr. Rhodes. Jennifer is fine. I will grab the Mentimeter slides and post those on Facebook and Twitter and Bluesky, and I will engage with you with dialogue there via email. I know that I don't have all of the answers to these questions, but I'm hoping that I'm hoping that by looking to the history of the protest community, that I inspired you somewhat and left you with a bit of hope. And I'm just grateful for everybody's time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we'll be starting again tomorrow around 9 o'clock EST. We'll be using similar links. So again, we're keeping the chats, we're keeping the resources, we'll post everything. This is really just part of a conversation that doesn't end here, especially because we're unapologetically online and happy to share those spaces and those resources. So thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here today. Thank you, everyone, for a great day one. And we'll see how our Wednesday goes tomorrow.
Thank you for having me. You guys organized a great conference. Bye.
Oh, thank you for being here. Bye, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you to CART. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.